We're kicking today off with React Native in 60 minutes, Introduction to Creating Your First Hybrid Native Application. Today's trainer is Rob Ocel, Software Architect and Engineering Lead at This Dot. Welcome, Rob. You can find Rob on Twitter using the handle shown at the bottom of the screen. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or feedback. JavaScript Marathon would not be possible without our sponsors. Our sponsor today is This Dot Labs, your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at thisdotlabs.com or send us an email at hi@thisdot.co. Do you find keeping up with constantly evolving technologies a struggle? Do you want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies? This Dot Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. Contact us today at hi@thisdot.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. Check out these upcoming events. This Friday, GraphQL Madrid meetup number 3, 12 p.m. Eastern. Also, check out our global meetups in Angular, GraphQL, React, and Vue. More details are available at thisdot.co. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Rob.
All right, hello everybody, and let's get started. We have kind of an ambitious goal. As Ben Church was just saying on Twitter, the first 60 minutes of React Native is basically, wait, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? Hopefully we'll get over some of that today. So today's goals are really to understand where React Native fits in the suite of options that we have nowadays for building mobile experiences. I hope to help you understand why you might choose it and how it might differ from other technologies that you might be considering. I want to get us started actually building something with React Native to show you what your first few minutes, your first day, your first few days is going to be, just playing and building with the technology. And I just want to get you super excited about this technology and make it something that you want to bring back to your teams, that you want to play with on side projects, and then you might consider for your next production application. In future sessions, we'll try to bring in some teachers to cover more of the advanced concepts, which we're not going to be able to get to today. Things like building custom components, animation, advanced design, and other types of things that, there's just not enough to get into, not enough time to get into all of those. So you want to support mobile. Why do you want to support mobile, right? Well, it could be because about half and growing of the world's internet traffic comes from mobile devices, based on some of the statistics that I could find. People are increasingly relying on their cell phones and their mobile devices in order to access the internet and all of the information that's available online. So your product owner comes in one day and says, we need to capture that mobile market. We need to have mobile support in our website. So what do you do? Well, you have a variety of different options, right? So from the most obvious, you can build an actual pure native application. You can build an Android app, you can build an iOS app, you can deploy them to the app stores and work in that way. On the further extreme, you can just make a pure website. So you can have something that just runs well on a mobile-sized screen, but inside of Chrome or Safari or any other mobile browser that the user might have. And as we sort of shift in the middle and kind of talk about it, we could say, well, we could build a PWA. Now, PWA is basically like a website, but it has additional features such as the ability to be installed to the home screen like other applications. And increasingly, PWAs are now able to be discovered on app stores. So I think Windows was the first one to do this, and then I think Google followed suit. Apple still lagging behind, but there's hope that PWAs will be more tightly integrated into the app stores in the future. Then you can have hybrid web solutions. This is popularized by technologies such as Ionic and Cordova. And the idea here is that we're going to actually build websites that, using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that we're going to run those inside of an app shell. You can sort of think of this like shipping your own web browser to your clients, but that web browser is extremely optimized just for displaying your website. And then we have the hybrid native solutions. This is where React Native fits in, other technologies as well, such as NativeScript, where instead of building a website and showing that inside of an application, we're going to actually use technologies such as JavaScript, like React, in order to define native interfaces that actually then run like native applications. So it's more like building a native application and coding it in JavaScript than hybrid web is like building a website. Okay. Now the next question you need to ask yourself is, do I actually need an application? Does it have to be an app? The answer to this is sort of dependent on your own project, right? Whether or not you need an application depends on what kind of features you want to use from the phone. What kind of native APIs do you need access to? If you're just getting and retrieving and displaying data from an API, you might not need an app. A mobile website or a PWA could be fine. But if you're doing a lot of really advanced features with the camera, with accelerometers, with any other types of sensors or native features, then that's going to push you more in the direction of using an app. You would really be surprised nowadays what the web is actually capable of doing on the native platform. There are a lot of web APIs that access native features, and that list is getting bigger. So this data is from whatwebcando.today. It's a site that sort of tracks what native features are enabled in the browser that you're accessing the site on. And it's actually quite impressive, but it's also platform specific. So if we look at the data for Chrome, you can see a lot of yeses. A lot of the things that you might want to do are actually supported through web APIs implemented in Chrome. This means that your PWAs and things similar to it can act in a lot of ways like native applications, and you might be able to get by without needing to use an app. This is the remaining APIs that they list. But on other browsers, it may or may not be the same level of support. So when I accessed the website from Safari, these were the results that I got at the time that I got these images. You can see that there are a lot of gaps in this case in the native APIs based on what's supported in Safari. Why is this particularly relevant? Well, it's because, and I'm surprised actually this is a much lesser known fact in web development. It's less known than I thought it was, which is that on iOS devices, even the Chrome browser is running as Safari, meaning it's using the WebKit engine. So your iOS users are going to have this level of support regardless of whether they're using the Chrome browser or Brave browser or Safari browser. And so, if you need a lot of native support and you have a lot of iOS users, this may or may not be something that you're going to be able to implement using these web APIs reliably, and this will push you more in the direction of actually using an app and app technologies. This is the remainder of that list. So, okay, let's just imagine that we decided we actually need to build an app. And let's further assume, because we're here talking about JavaScript Marathon, we're here talking about React Native, that we're React developers and JavaScript developers, but we don't know Java. We may not know Swift to do iOS development. So we know we can't make a purely native application. That's not in our skill set. And we know we can't use a PWA or a website, a mobile web, because we know we need some of those features that are only available in these app shells. Okay, so that left us with two choices on that spectrum that I showed earlier, hybrid web and hybrid mobile. Or hybrid native, excuse me. What are these differences? How should we understand these differences? Well, one of the biggest differences is the core ethos. So the hybrid web, again, popularized by Apache Cordova, had this ethos of write once, run anywhere. It was this sort of goal, this vision, this aspirational desire that we could write one code base, one set of UIs in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then execute them on any platform. So it means, again, taking those core web technologies that we already have studied and know, then using technologies such as Cordova and Ionic in order to package those contents and then be able to distribute them either as websites or as native applications or on desktop as desktop applications using technology such as Electron, right? So this is what the goal was. We want to have basically, ideally, the exact same code running the exact same views running on any platform that we want. Okay, so what was the problem? The problem here, such as it is that hybrid native advocates would say, universal code sharing isn't maybe the goal that we want to achieve. It's not that we want to have code that's universal everywhere. That's not necessarily the desire. We should be able to customize our applications to the platforms on which they run. We know that iOS, the look and feel of an iOS application is a little bit different. iPhone users expect things to behave a little bit differently than Android users might, and certainly differently than web users might. And so people can feel when they're getting a sort of average view. So if you try to run the exact same views, if you try to find out middle ground between Android and iOS, or if you commit to one look and feel over the other, it's going to feel out of place in an ecosystem of other apps which are not like that. And so people said customizing is good. Customizing gives a better experience to our users. So these advocates would say with hybrid native, the problem isn't that we need customized code. It's that, in order to do this before, we needed customized technology. I needed to know Java and Swift and JavaScript and C++ and C# and Java, right? I needed to know all these things in order to deploy on all these different platforms. That's a lot for me to learn. I don't want to have to learn that. So they replaced the write once, run anywhere mantra with learn once, write everywhere. Write anywhere. So what would that mean? It means that as React developers, we come here and we say, well, I know React. So that's my starting point. I know React. And then if I use React, I know I can build websites. If I use React Native, I know I can build native applications. And if I use React and or React Native or any other type of bundling technology, I can build desktop applications with Electron. How cool is that? Instead of having to learn 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different languages and all the ecosystem stuff that goes along with it, we can learn React and then use that to build anything that we want to, and build it in a way that feels correct, feels performant, and looks correct to the exact platform that we're running it on. That's a great question. The question asked was, where does Xamarin fall on the spectrum? And I'll be honest, it's been a little while since I loaded Xamarin. My expectation, or my thought, as I recall, is that Xamarin is going to be more like Cordova and Ionic in that I believe it's hosting it as web content, but I'm a little bit out of my depth there. So if anybody else in the chat knows that, the exact implementation of Xamarin and whether it's a hybrid native or a hybrid web solution, and wants to answer that, please feel free. Okay, so fine. You listen to all of that and you go, well, okay, great. I love when you give me sort of it depends and you let me choose, but what's best? Just tell me what's best so I can pick it. And the answer is that there is no best, unfortunately, right? It's all just a series of trade-offs. And I've captured some of that here. Again, you can take a screenshot of this. You can come back to this video later in the recording and kind of read through this. Some of the things that I want to call out, though, that are really fascinating is that, one of the things that you want to consider is distribution. Again, if you do a native application, you have to distribute through the app stores. There's really no way around this. Progressive web apps actually have the choice to distribute either through the browser, through the app store, or through both. Now, there's an asterisk on the app store because it's not the Apple app store. It's not all of the app stores, but some of them allow PWAs right now. You have to, again, decide whether you want to use web APIs or native APIs. If white labeling is a concern, you might think about how that might affect your choice if you need to deploy multiple versions of your application for different customers. Then code updates is another thing to think about. Now, with mobile web and progressive web applications, you can download new code using service workers to get automatic updates. With hybrid mobile and hybrid native, you have this option as well. It was sort of a perception that hybrid native didn't have this ability to update live, but it does. There are certain things with all these native solutions that you cannot update automatically and do require App Store pushes. And in fact, there are rules in the App Stores which govern which things you're allowed to automatically update and which things you're not. And you want to be very careful of that so you don't get your app kicked off the App Stores. But you are allowed to do some code updates as long as it doesn't change the nature of your application such that it becomes deceptive. Now, let's assume that we all just decided that React Native is the best strategy to go with, because otherwise I don't have much else to talk about for the rest of this conversation. So we've covered some of the basics and the general ideas of, oh, the resolution wasn't great on the screens. Yeah, absolutely. I will definitely make sure that we send out a link to like a spreadsheet that has that pros and cons slide in it. Absolutely. We'll make sure that that gets in there and gets in the show notes for the people that are watching this on YouTube after the fact. Great question, thanks. All right, so let's again assume that we are talking about React Native, and we've all decided that we want to do this hybrid native solution, and this is the way we're going to go. So let's focus on this in specific. How is React Native like React? How is it different? The first thing, which is really cool about it, assuming that you know nothing else about React Native, is does it have JSX? Yes, it does. React Native does use JSX, but does it use HTML? No, it doesn't actually use HTML. That's what makes it work. That's what makes it a hybrid native solution. That's also the power of React, that we can swap out the DOM renderer with an entirely different renderer, which compiles our components down to native elements and native controls. What a really cool concept. So instead of dealing with things like divs or paragraphs or anchors or images, we're going to instead use React Native components like views and text and buttons and images. Now, for some of you that are using component libraries or you build these types of design systems in your own apps, you might be like, hey man, we're already not using divs and paragraphs and anchors and images. We're already using things like views and stacks and spacers and buttons and images. This is already how I code. I almost barely know how this translates down to HTML at the bottom. Cool. If you do that way, React Native is really not going to be a big conceptual leap for you. It's more just the details that you'll have to pick up. But if you're used to just really being in the HTML, you're just going to have to learn a different set of tags, a different set of base elements other than the divs and the anchors that you're used to using. So how does this actually work? Well, what underlies these components, what they translate into isn't DOM, as I mentioned. It's actually native elements. So the view component in React Native might turn into UI view on iOS, and the text component might turn into something like NS attributed string on iOS. And React Native is really managing that. So what does that look like? Well, it means that if we have a component in React Native, then what's happening underneath the hood, or what's implemented in the library itself, is that component, view or text or image or button, has behind it a corresponding implementation in Android, a corresponding implementation in iOS, and a corresponding implementation for web. And it's going to choose the correct implementation depending on the platform in which you've built, what you've built, what you're debugging as, what you're operating as, what you're accessing it as. So the React Native connections basically say, hey, I want you to put this native element, this native binding in the place of this component. It's a really fascinating system. If you have interest in this, beyond a beginner level, it's worth looking at the source code that actually implements some of these things. It's worth looking at the source code for third-party libraries that implement custom components, because this system can be extended. You can build arbitrarily complex components, elements in Android, in iOS, and then connect those yourself to your own React Native component, and then use that in applications or share it with other people. So it means that there's an awesome, vibrant ecosystem of people building really cool things in React Native and sharing them with others. Okay, CSS, right? We're React developers. Web, we've got CSS. Does that exist in React Native? Sort of exists. React Native does use a familiar CSS-like syntax, but it's not fully CSS, right? Because it's not web. So CSS is a web technology. Because we're not fully web, we don't have that. But a goal of React and React Native is this hybrid native philosophy of learning once. So we don't want to stray too far from this concept. So React Native does have a CSS-like syntax, which we'll look at in the code examples, but it's not fully CSS. Sizing is, absolute or flex. The sizing and positioning is a bit more, it has some additional things that it enforces and that it requires you to take into account. Interestingly, you can size things in absolute pixels, the idea of pixels, but but these pixels aren't actually specified as pixels or ems or rems. They're actually device-independent pixels, if that means something to you. Basically, phones come in a lot of different resolutions. Some are extremely pixel dense. Some are not that way. And for that, the devices still have sort of a fixed amount of device-independent pixels across and down. And that's what we're going to do our sizing in our CSS on. Interestingly, this custom CSS implementation that React Native has also has a cascade. It's limited in some ways, but it has that. So you expect maybe if I set the text size and the color on this root element that it would kind of go down, and it does have that behavior. And it does have this idea of style sheets. They're not exactly like CSS style sheets, but you'll kind of see. It'll look and feel similar. It's not going to be too dissimilar, but you will over time have to learn the differences. Okay, so we've already kind of covered this, but does this mean we only have to write code once and run it everywhere? No, of course not. That's not a philosophy. That's not the goal of hybrid native solutions, but it is a goal to minimize that, right? We don't want to customize stuff. We're using a universal platform. If I wanted to customize everything, well, then I would just build a native application, right? So I want to share some code. I want to share as much code as possible, but I want to preserve the ability to write custom code. And there's actually a lot of ways that React Native lets you do this because, again, it's not a goal of it to not do this. It is a goal of it to do this, so it provides you a lot of ways to do that. The first way that it does this is with the platform library. Platform lets you track the OS, the version, the OS and the version, so the platform and the version of the person using the current application. So you can write code on a small level. Like if it's iOS, it has to do this slightly different thing. If it's Android, it has to do this. If it's web, it does this. If it's native, it does this. You have that ability to customize code at a micro level to the line. You can have it switch between different components on different platforms. You can have it do that, again, at a micro level. But if you need to get bigger than that, and you need to have a larger chunk of code, well, it has this really cool way of doing imports in resolution. So you might build a piece of code called widget.js. And by default, widget.js will be used on every platform. But if you, pardon me, I'm just gonna take a sip here. If you give it a name like widget.native.js, then whenever widget.js is imported, if you're on the native platforms, so you're on iOS or Android, one second, I'm just gonna mute myself. There we go. So if you're on the native platforms, iOS or Android, then it will use this instead. You can even get more granular than that. You can say, hey, I want widget.ios.js and widget.android.js. And if the person that's importing widget.js is on an iOS device, they're going to get widget.ios.js. So in this really cool way, you kind of have this default option that everything imports from, and then it'll correctly pick the right override inside of the framework. You don't have to really worry about it or think about it. It's a really powerful way to get customized code. You don't have to manage the custom imports yourself. If something's going to be replaced wholesale, you can just replace it with just the file name conventions. Super powerful. Okay. So what about third-party libraries, right? You're using a date library. You're using RxJS. You're using, a form library. Can I use those? Can I just copy my entire existing website into React Native and does it just work? Again, it depends. There are libraries that are built for React Native. Those are obviously okay. But beyond that, there are some rules of thumb, things that you'll learn over time. For example, the more a library uses only JavaScript features, you're probably pretty good. That's probably going to work. Again, React Native uses JavaScript core, I think, as its engine. It has most of the features. It has a powerful set of features. So if it uses JavaScript features, probably good. The more a library uses the Node APIs or browser APIs, now you're starting to get into some possible Node territory here, because again, we're not running in those platforms, well, at least not all the time. So you have to be careful with this and make sure and test to make sure that the features you're using don't rely on those APIs or break if they're not present. And of course, if the library uses React DOM or uses direct DOM manipulation, now we're probably in the it's not going to work territory. So your form library may not be working because, again, it's trying to make form elements out of HTML and DOM, and that's not what you're going to have access to. That's not what your app is compiling to. So, again, it's rules of thumb. A lot of libraries will work, a lot won't. And there's a lot of libraries built specifically for React Native. You just have to find them. And if you're not sure, ask, test it out, or just stick to things that support React Native. You should mostly be fine. All right, so lastly, you currently building your app with Create React App. Can I use that? No, we don't use Create React App here because we're building a different type of application. We have a couple different options. So for larger, more complex production applications, you can and probably should use the React Native CLI. This gives you maximum flexibility. It gives you maximum access to the native underpinnings that are being connected to with React Native. It's a really powerful way to really customize your React Native experience. But for smaller, less complex applications, you can use the Expo CLI. This is really cool because it has a more streamlined connection. It hides a lot of the details of how it translates into native code away from you and gives you points where you can connect and get access to that kind of stuff. But it kind of manages it for you. It takes away the more obnoxious parts of dealing with native applications and lets you focus on building the UI and the logic. You can eject from the Expo CLI if you decide you need more powerful control. But this is a good place to start. It's where we're going to start here in a minute. And lastly, if you just want to play around with React Native, you want to kind of just try out some widgets, you want to make a hello world, you want to see it on your actual physical device that you're holding in your hand right now, you can get a code sandbox style editor at snack.expo.io. Not a sponsor, right? Just really cool tool. Snack.expo.io, and you can actually play with React Native in the browser, and using their Expo client, you can actually see what you're coding on your physical device, not just in an emulator, although they have those as well. You can actually see it on your device. All right, that was more than enough talking. Let's actually get into some playing and kind of seeing what you will see when you install this for the first time. So I am going to stop sharing this presentation and switch over to my other screen. So the question is, do I feel that React Native experience is closer to the native experience than, say, Cordova, but maybe a step away from native code? It speeds development. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's definitely closer to the native experience than Cordova because the goal is to make things that turn into native elements. So when you open up a React Native application on Android, you're not seeing HTML elements styled like native elements. If you open it up on Android, you're going to see Android elements, what they actually look like if you built them with Java. If you open up on iOS, you're going to see iOS elements that look exactly like you did it if you built them in Swift. So you will get a more natural native experience than, say, Cordova. That said, Cordova is not bad because when you have Cordova, you can reuse a lot more of your existing website code, right? You have existing website views built in React and components, and it's actually a lot simpler to get from an existing website to a Cordova-hosted native application than it is to get all the way to React Native. So everything is a trade-off. I think React Native is really cool. I think hybrid native technology is really cool. If I was starting with a brand new project, I would prefer it over a hybrid web solution, me personally, right? But again, it's all about the trade-offs. You have to ask yourself, am I getting what I want out of my solution? All right, so we are back with the sharing, and I will open up my terminal. For some reason, it made itself small again. Big again. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do when you get to your terminal, is that big enough? Let me know if it's too small still. So the first thing that you're going to do is you are going to install it, the Expo CLI, or the React Native CLI, or both. Do whatever. If you want to play with both, play with both. But we're going to be using the Expo CLI. So you can do npm or yarn install globally the Expo CLI. That's going to give you the ability, after you do that, to do Expo init. And so when you do Expo init, it's going to build you a new React Native application, so you can name it. So we can call it like JavaScript Marathon Live, yeah. And you can have a bunch of different starters for React Native. So you can have, for example, they come with these right out of the box. You can get a blank one that just has the Expo CLI stuff in it and the React Native stuff in it that's necessary. You can have a blank but with TypeScript. So again, I didn't talk about TypeScript, but if you like TypeScript, it's here for you. You don't have to get rid of it. You can keep using it, and it is awesome. They give you this example which has tabs, which we will actually select this one. It gives us a project that has some stuff in it. It's not completely blank. This will give you the ability to really play with something that already exists, play with navigation, and see how that goes. And there's a couple others. But if you select tabs, it's just going to immediately start installing and downloading all of the files. Now, this takes a little bit of time. Whenever you're going to do anything with native, it takes a lot of time because these are big things that we're trying to create. So that would take a little bit of time, but I already have this implemented here. Okay. So there we go. Okay. So I've already got it running. So what would happen is after it's built, you can go into your project and you can do yarn start. And so when you do start, yarn start, npm run start, you can, again, whatever tool you use. I noticed I did npm install and then I switched over to yarn, but you can use either which one you want. Once you start, it's going to execute here, and it's going to build a little bit, and then it's going to run and execute the Expo UI, which is going to load and look a bit like this. I can actually start it fresh so that we can actually see what that looks like. Okay, so now this thing is actually running. So this is like the sort of mission control for your Expo app. So it's giving you some information about the build process. It's going to let you run your code on Android, a simulator, if you have the Android Studio and the simulators installed. It'll let you run it on an iOS simulator if you have Xcode and the iOS simulators installed. It'll let you run it in a web browser, so you can check the web target of your application. You can send people links. You can switch to production mode. Again, a lot of different ways that you can share connections with people. One of the coolest is this QR code, which we're going to come back to this in just a second. So this is what you get with Expo. Now let's look at what the actual code looks like. So the actual code comes in looking like this. And if we kind of close out these, what we'll notice is that this is the default that it gave us. This is, again, for their tab. So this isn't completely blank. This is not a completely empty project, but this is what you would get when you get their sort of starter, right? So we see a couple of Expo-specific configuration folders. Don't worry about those too much. Then we have our assets folder. Okay, am I back? I think my internet blipped at my house. That's the joys of streaming online. Sarah, can you pop in and let me know if I'm back? I am? Okay, you're muted, but I saw you pop in happily, so that means I'm probably back.
You're all good, Rob.
Okay, great. All right, apologies for the little snafu there. All right, so I was talking about assets. So your assets are the things that are going to actually package with your application. Now, you have the ability to go out to the internet and get assets, so things like images, etc. That's fine, right? But for the things that you're going to need, the things you're going to use, there's a lot of value in packaging some of these assets internally to your applications. Obviously, for things like your splash screen, you don't want to have to hit an API to get your splash screen. Not even sure if that's allowed. Pretty sure it isn't. But like things like that. So you can have a certain amount of assets that are packaged in your application. But of course, for every asset you put into your application, it does bloat the size of your application. With mobile apps, people are generally less concerned about size of executables. But for some people, it matters. So this is kind of where you get access to a lot of that kind of stuff. The question, thank you everybody for helping me out. The question was, is TypeScript used by most React devs? Honestly, I don't know if it's currently used by most, but I'll tell you it's on fire in the React community. It is catching on by, React Native devs. I don't know the answer to that. But I think just in general, TypeScript is winning the hearts and minds of developers everywhere. All right, so that's our assets folder. Then what they give us is a components folder. So these are, again, the smaller tools that we use to build things out. They give us a constants folder, which they use to, for constants, for colors, for layout, those types of things. They've given us a hooks folder. And what's interesting about the hooks folder is they gave us this use color scheme hook, which they use to kind of connect to like the light and dark themes and things like that. But if you look, check this out, use color scheme.web.ts. That's exactly what we were talking about with the overridden part. So this use color scheme piece, that's what it'll do if it's not web. And if it is web, it's going to use this. And you can see that React Native currently does not support web. So all it is an override of the function that just returns light theme. And this is how powerful and easy it is to have custom code per platform. So if we open this up in the web browser, it's always going to be light theme. If we open this up in a native app, it's going to be whatever the phone is configured to use. Here's our navigation. We didn't talk about navigation in the intro, but of course, right, applications are difficult to write if it's all one component. We love the idea of navigation. We like using things like Reach Router, React Router, all the different types of routing solutions that are out there. Does something like that exist in native? Absolutely, it exists. But the concept of URLs isn't quite the same. So we don't really have this idea of URLs in quite the same way. But we have this idea of routes still. And so it uses the React Native, the React navigation component to do this. And so if we look in our app defines sort of like this navigation component, which is acting a bit like a router output, a router outlet type of component, a place where routed stuff is going to go. That implementation is actually here in the index. It has this, which is a navigation container. And again, navigation container is something specific to React navigation. As you learn React navigation, again, you'll learn these. But if you look, you put all your navigators in here, and you see we have this root one. And this root one is this stack navigator, which has a screen. And we have these different screens. So we have this named screen root, and we have this named screen not found. And so, it's kind of like having like a 404 page type of thing here. And we can see that that's going to be our not found screen, and our root will be our bottom tab navigator. It's another thing in the navigation. If we were to follow that through, we can see that there is now more nested navigation, where we have our tab 1 and our tab 2. We haven't looked at what this application looks like, but when you see it, you'll see we have kind of a tabbed navigation between two different pages, kind of a tab 1 and a tab 2. And that's all being implemented here. So when you look at those router configs, those navigation configs, they should feel like the routers that you're used to using, but they are different. It's distinct. We're going between screens, not so much different URLs. So it's different in some ways, but again, with a lot of things with React Native, it'll be different, but it should feel the same. And down here, we have our two screens. So our number 1 screen and our number 2 screen. These are basically just have some text in there, a view, and then we have this edit screen info. And so let's kind of see what this looks like. So if we open up this project, and what I'm going to do now is something that I have never had the guts to do in any previous experiment, which is that I am going to bring my phone on screen and show you that we can actually run this in a, you're hiding part of the, okay. Find it. Don't fail me. Am I not showing the whole thing here? Okay, is that better? Literally worked just before going live. Are you really not going to work for me? Okay, let me pull my phone slightly off screen to find what's going on here real quick. Oh, okay, we're back. Okay, so when I scanned this QR code on my phone, you see this pop down now, open an Expo. That's what we're going to do. And what's happening now down on the bottom, you see, is it's downloading the JavaScript bundle for the app. And so now we're running the code that we just showed in my phone. So this is actually running on device. This is not emulator, it's not simulator, it's not a spoof. This is literally on my phone over here on the side. And you can see we have a 2-tab display. Again, the only real difference between the two pages is that we have tab 1 and tab 2. So this is what's really cool about working with anything to do with React Native and Expo specifically, is that through their Expo client on your phone, you can just be seeing the stuff on device right away. And if you've ever done native development before, seeing it on device is actually, was for a long time one of the biggest barriers. It was super slow to have to do the builds and the push on your phone. I mean, there are ways to do it, but it could be difficult, especially if you were doing like a Cordova world type of situation. So you would do a lot of simulators, you would do a lot of web testing. You do have that option here. Again, we can open it up in the web browser. We're going to see the same UI after it's building. It's building Webpack. And here we have a similar UI. If I was to shrink this down so that it looked like mobile, again, feels and looks very much the same. Remember, this is trapped on light view because of the stuff that we saw before. Okay. So let's go and change some stuff, right? So let's go and change some stuff. Let's just do the obvious stuff, right? Like let's get our first couple just obvious experiments out of the way. So on tab 1, we just want to do our hello world. And what we're going to see here is hello world. Okay, so we know we're getting our live update working. Okay, great. But let's do something a little bit more interesting, at least just a little bit more interesting. And let's say that we want to display a list. A list of data is a super common thing that we want to display. So what would we need to do to make a list appear? Well, the first thing is, let's get rid of this code. Let's clear that out. So we have hello world. And then we know that we need a list. So we need to have some state. Well, how do we do state in React, right? We're going to do use state. We're going to use our hooks. So we can have, say, so the one that I want to do is I want to pull down a list of Pokemon. So I'm going to do Pokemon and set Pokemon equals react.useState, and we're going to do an empty thing. And I'm going to, unfortunately, I know I made this in TypeScript, but I don't have time to make my types, so I'm just going to escape out to use any. And so I'm going to store an array of Pokemon, and now I know I need to show Pokemon, but I don't know, well, how to get them. So how can I get Pokemon? Well, it turns out that there is a Poke API, which we can use. But OK, so I have an API, but how am I going to access that API? Well, first, we might want to use an effect that we might want to fire once. And we might want to hit this API. Now, if we were using the web, we might use something like fetch or Axios. Turns out that there actually is an implementation of fetch in React Native, where we can pass in exactly what you would expect to have happen here. We can hit a URL, and then we can hit the Pokemon URL, and then we can set a limit. This doesn't have anything to do with React Native. This is just their API. I can grab the first 151 Pokemon. The question is, how can I get your application working on my phone? So for security reasons, I didn't want to enable that. So you can actually set it up in the Expo CLI. You can set up a tunnel mode. And that tunnel mode will let anybody connect from outside of your LAN. I have it set to LAN mode, so you have to be on my network to get access to it. And again, that's just more for security. I thought about enabling this for everybody, and then I thought, you guys are smarter than me, so I'm going to pass on that. But you could enable tunnel mode, and you could have a bunch of people, especially now that you're all working remotely, you could have you all just connected, looking at the updates on your own devices, testing it on 6, 7, 8 different devices simultaneously. Really cool. Great question, though. Apologies you can't see this on your device right now. All right, so we were connecting this API. So we're going to grab the first 151 Pokemon, and then we just do very web-looking stuff, right? So we're going to get the JSON out of the response. And then we are going to get the Poke data, and we need to get this into our state. So what we need to do is set Pokemon. And if you were to actually like do this, like Pokemon limit equals, say, 1 or 2, you can see what this result is. It's going to come in and it's going to have a results is actually the array we want. So we actually want results, and then we want to set Pokemon on this. Right? Okay. So now we have data. Oh, I'm sorry. What am I doing here? Poke data. Poke data.results. Okay, so we are now setting that data locally. Okay, we have it set locally, but now we have to display it. So how do we actually do that? Do I do like a Pokemon, dot map, a bunch of text elements? Like, what do I do? And this is kind of the fun slash, can be the learning curve of React Native, is you would go to React Native to their components section, and you'd sort of shop around, look for the thing that you want. And you might go like, hey, flat list sounds awfully interesting. Look at all these features it has. That looks really cool. And so you come down here and see the examples. Notice how it's using Snack. It's using Expo here. So you can actually, if this was a wider screen, you would see the simulator off to the right. But it'll show us how to use it. And we have this flat list that takes an array of data, has a render item, and a key extractor. Okay, sounds good. So let's do that. So let's come up here. Let's delete our unused imports. Let's import from React Native that flat list. All right. And now let's add it. So we have our flat list. And we know it took a data prop. And so the data prop is going to be our Pokemon. Then it needs a key extractor, which, because if you're going to map over something, right, you want keys. So we want to define a method that takes the keys. And it just turns out that the names of the Pokemon in this list are unique. So we can use the name as a key. Fair enough. Good enough for now. And then the last is a render item. So render item is going to say, okay, for each element in the array, I'm going to use the render item prop to determine how to render that data in my flat list. And so, this method can take an info, and we can decide what to do. So in this case, let's just start by doing text. Let's do a text element, and let's make that text element info.text. No. Info.item.name. So info has an item in it. It has another thing, I think index as well in it, but it has the item in it. And so we'll reach into the item and we'll pull out the name, which is the data that we got. And now if we save this, ta-da! There's all our Pokemon. And we can scroll, and it has very smooth scrolling. It might not be smooth when you guys are looking at this on the web, but trust me, it's smooth locally. And it's doing virtualization. It's doing all sorts of fanciness to deal with this, right? Now, it's all centered like this. Now, why is it centered? It's centered because it's inside of a view of style container, and that thing has a line. It's a flex container that has align elements, item center, and justify content center. So if I align if I don't center the items, they can read over to the side. If I want this text to look different, I can add a style property here. And I can reach down into this styles and pull out anything I want. So I can say styles.title, and I'll make everything end up looking like a title and being really big and bold. I could define my own, I could make something else here that says, list item or Pokemon names, right? Like I can do that. Whatever I want to do with these style sheets, I can move these in. If I want to add some margins and get them spaced more, I can do vertical margins. And remember, we're using device-independent pixels. So 5 in device-independent pixels, and now stuff spaces out. So this should feel pretty much like React. If you've never looked at React Native, you're like, okay, well, I didn't know what text was. I didn't know what view was. I didn't know what flat list was. But you can look and see, hey, this view is actually this. It's a little hard to see on the web, but this little divider line here, it's like a horizontal rule. That's what it's acting as. This text is a title, right? This is just a table or a list of data. Good, fair enough. So, that's step one. Now, what if we want to do something else? Like, let's just keep playing some more. Let's do another one, which is called like, what's that Pokemon? If anybody ever watched the Pokemon cartoon when they were a kid, I don't know if it's what's that Pokemon or name that Pokemon, but either way, what's that Pokemon? And so I'll save this to 2, and then over here we have to go to our second tab. Okay, so we have what's that Pokemon. Okay, so what do we want to do on this tab? What if we wanted to like come up with a random Pokemon to show up on screen? So real quickly, I'll answer this question because I think it's hilarious. I think it's really funny. Does it require a lot of CPU power to stream and emulate at the same time? Interestingly, it doesn't take a lot of CPU power to stream because we use StreamYard. Shout out to StreamYard, which they suck up most of the CPU power to do the streaming. It does take a little bit of CPU power to film me at the same time, but and I don't know how much the fans are coming through on the speaker, but it does require some CPU power, absolutely. Hopefully the fans aren't coming in too loud. I couldn't figure out a way to get this to be a little quieter. All right, so let's go back to finishing this up. So we want to get some random Pokemon. So like, what do? We know we're going to want text, right? And we know this text is going to be the name of the Pokemon. So let's just like say Bulbasaur, right? And then we want to like show the Pokemon. That would be fun. So we know we need an image. Okay, but we don't know how images work. So let's go to here to image and see that we need a style if we need one and a source. Okay, fair enough. Let's go back here and let's do source equals. And this will take an object with a URI property, and I need a link now because we're going to get ours from the web. We're not going to do ours in the repository. We're going to do it from the web. So let's go to this. Let's get Pokemon Bulbasaur. And let's poke into the data, and let's get from the list of sprites this official artwork. Okay, let's pull that in. Okay, there we go. And I have not closed this, so let's do that. Okay, now nothing showed up. Why did nothing show up? Well, it turns out that, again, the native platform is a bit more strict than the web. It's not going to just take the default resolution of the image. So we actually have to define it. So let's do like a Pokemon image style, and let's give it a width of 250 device-independent pixels and a height of 250. You can do percentages. You can do flex. I don't know if flex would work in this case, but you can do a lot of different options, play around with it. And then I need to assign it here. Style equals styles.Pokemon image. And what did I mess up? Pokemon image. Oh, I put it on the text. It's funny, I was just telling somebody earlier that I had done that in another live coding session, and I completely got confused on what I was working on. Okay, so I put it now on the image. There's our buddy Bulbasaur. So, yeah, so there's Bulbasaur. So now we know that we are going to need like a randomize ability. So is there a button? Turns out there is. It's almost like this demo was set up ahead of time. So the button, here's the button. On press, title, color, and accessibility. Accessibility is a big thing that has a lot of support in React Native that we're not going to touch on directly today, but so we know we need a title and an on press. So let's do a title equals randomize. It's Bulbasaur. We know we need a title of randomize, and on press, let's just do nothing for now because we don't know what we're going to do. And our button appeared. And this button has the default styling of like a clickable element. There are other ways to do clickables and touchables as well. And again, these would look customized for every platform. So I think I still have the app open over here. And so if I was to scroll down, can I get a smaller phone, please? Here, it looks different on web. So again, it is interesting that the style of these elements is platform specific. So that's an important part of of React Native is that it does render in the style native to its the right platform. So again, you have to be careful sometimes with some of these things that you don't want to override too many of the stylings and mess it up for some of the other platforms. G-Man, I appreciate that, but I am a Squirtle for life. CSS animations do not work, but there is an entire section which I will not possibly have enough time to get into. If you go to the docs, it has an amazing animation library. Design, interaction, animations. Oops. What did I just do? Animations. It has an awesome animation library where you can do all sorts of super complex animations. You can have animations running simultaneously. You can have them orchestrated. It's really, really, really cool and powerful. Absolutely look through it. It's awesome. And there are libraries that also support it as well to make it even easier to use. Okay, so we know we want to make this random. So to do that, we might want to make a custom hook. Can you do that? Yes, you can do that. So we can say use Pokemon API and make our own hook. And so we know that we need to do the fetch operation. Well, we know we need to get the Pokemon in here first. So we know we need to do const Pokemon set Pokemon. It's going to be react.useState. And we'll give it a name, cold sore. So image URI is this. Okay, and so just to start out with, just to get us back to basic, let's return Pokemon. And down here, let's do const Pokemon equals use Pokemon API. And over here, we're going to swap this out for Pokemon.name. And down here, we're going to switch this out for Pokemon.imageURI. Now let's format that. And okay, we didn't break it, so it's working. I can show you if I change this to name, right? This isn't going to work. So I did correctly restore the original functionality. So we know we need a randomized function. And so we know we're going to have to return that randomized function because we know that this click handler needs to be that randomized function. Oh, is this in? That one? Okay. All right. So we know we need a randomized function. So what will this do? So randomize, we need a random int. So we know we need a poke index equals math. So you have the same sort of JavaScript libraries that you know and love. Times 151. Expected 0 arguments. I've got one. Oh, it's supposed to be round. Random. It's supposed to be round. Math.round. So that's my index. And then again, we know that we want to hit this API. Instead of limit, we're going to just get cookie index. Okay, and then we need to process that. So res is res.json and cookie data. What do we do here? So here we know we want to do set Pokemon. And what do we actually set? Now I'm going to spare us having to look. It actually is pokedata.name. This one is a little bit more complex though. Image URI is actually pokedata.sprites.other bracket because it's weird. Official artwork dot front default. Holy cow! If I got that right on the first try, I'm going to be amazed. And I'll close that and hit this. Now over here on the right, if I hit randomize, ta-da! Okay, so again, how much of what we've been doing looks like React Native, and how much of this looks like React, right? It looks like React, and the React Native parts have been learning, hey, how do images render? How do lists of things render? How do buttons render? And this is just stuff you'll learn as you play with it. The last thing that I want to show really quick is, you can just keep scaling up from here. So you can do, for example, what if I wanted to have a state and a set state, and I wanted to do another use state here, and it was set to initial by default. And then when I'm loading, I want this to be set state. Well, I shouldn't have called it state, but fair enough. Loading. And then here, I want to call it set state loaded. OK, so I can do that, and that's not going to change anything. But down here now, I can return that state. And down here, I can return that state. And what if I want to show like a loading spinner, right? I can do something like that, maybe, right? I can, but so I can have this activity indicator. Again, this is just the process of developing, of learning React Native. You're just looking for cool stuff that you want to do, and you can pull it in. So what if I do activity spinner? What if I just add an activity spinner? Like what does that look like, right? I'll just add it with no arguments. I should actually import it, maybe. Hiding behind this unhandled exception at the bottom is my link back. So notice how it's just a spinner just constantly going. So it turns out that I can actually assign this spinner an animating property, which I can set to state equals loading. And then I can now, whenever I click randomize, you'll see the spinner appear for a moment or two before the new thing comes in. If I want to make the other stuff disappear, I can do state not equal to loading. And I can make a fragment here. I can copy all this in. And save it. And this is kind of, again, how much of this felt like React Native? How much of this felt like React? That's the power of it, right? Learn once, write anywhere. Yes, it has its own semantics. Style sheets are not quite the same, right? Yes, the DOM is not quite the same. There will be things that you expect to be true from the web that will not be true on native. These are things that you will learn. But how much more productive can we be in the first 20 or 30 minutes just because we know React, we know web development, and therefore we have the basics of building cool applications that have state, that have routing, that have all this type of information, conditional appearances and things like that. And now we can utilize the extra pieces of React Native to just turn this into an app that has been running on my phone the whole time. My phone is burning hot over here on the side. That is the power of React Native. Hopefully this has excited all of you. Let me just check quickly if there were any other questions. Y'all have been doing a really good job of answering each other's questions. As far as issues installing the Expo CLI, there are issues. Setting up this demo, because I hadn't had it set up on this laptop yet, installing Android Studio, installing Xcode, getting all that working right. Unfortunately, Expo just updated because of the new iOS 14, because of the new thing. They just rolled over their SDK versions. So just a couple days ago, this demo wasn't working anymore on device until they increased, or on emulator, until they increased their, until they updated their SDK. So they actually are in a position of flux. If you are having issues, take it to their GitHub, it's their communities. They're really helpful. And they are in flux right now because of pushing out new SDK versions across the different platforms. So I wish you luck on that. But yeah, it isn't the most trivial thing. But once you get it running, it's good to go. All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending this session of JavaScript Marathon. Like I said, this will likely not be the last React Native course that we do. We want to get into animation. We want to get into the more complicated stuff. But we really just wanted to get more people excited about building native applications using React Native because it is powerful, it is cool, it is production ready, it is widely used by big and small companies. It's awesome for side projects. Definitely take a look at it. Let us know if you have any questions or if you encounter any issues. Of course, the conversation, as we say, does not have to end here. Please reach out to me on Twitter at Robocell. That's ROBOCELL. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have or maybe put you up with other people that can answer them for you. And if you'd like to reach out to this.or this.labs on Twitter, you can find us at this.labs as well if you have any questions. Please reach out to us. So we have a lot of other really cool sessions. Please stick around for some of those. We're talking about NX on the Angular track. We're going to be talking about GreenSock and animations later. There's a lot of really cool courses and things happening today during the JavaScript Marathon. So thank you, everybody, for being here, for attending, and we will see you